All right, to discuss further the significance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, let's now go across to our guest. Joining me on the show is Julia Melnikova, Program Manager at the RIAC, joining us live from Moscow. Thanks very much, Julia, for joining us here on News 9 Live. Let me begin by asking you, how are people in Russia and the media in Russia looking at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to your country? Goes without saying that India and Russia have had historical ties that go back at least 7 decades, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi also has a personal equation with President Putin, and the bonhomie has clearly been on display.
Right. I couldn't agree more with what you have just said, because both the media and the public have been explicitly complimentary, I would say, towards the visit. Because you have probably seen the pictures already, how Prime Minister Modi was cheered by the Indian diaspora and other people near the hotel where he is staying during his visit in Moscow. But I can say that also in the expert community, everyone was very, very happy and very pleased that his first overseas trip was scheduled exactly to Russia, because there are so many issues on the agenda both presidents have to discuss. And there are also no negative emotions attached to Russia-India partnership. Because if you ask the broader public, what people would recall is the Soviet-Indian friendship that lasted throughout the whole second half of the 20th century, without any negative sentiment as possibly attached to, say, Russia-China friendship, because Russia-China relationship have survived several difficult periods in their history, whereas Russia and India have always been enjoying constructive relationship. And given that, and given also the very broad and very popular outreach of the Indian culture in Russia, I would say that this visit has been looked at as a very positive event for the bilateral relationship.
Well, certainly a big boost for the bilateral relationship. Julia, let me ask you this. Is there a sense at the Kremlin that growing ties between Russia and China have been a matter of concern for India, which of course cherishes its long-standing ties with Russia, even though of course all sides have maintained that the two relationships should be de-hyphenated. But do you believe that the Kremlin is in a sense sensitive to India's concerns on this?
Well, I wouldn't speak for the Kremlin sentiment, of course, in here, but I'd say that I think it's clear to me that the Russian diplomacy, like say foreign ministry, is very well aware of how sensitive the issue is for India. And on the second track, we also discuss it repeatedly during our second track meetings with Indian think tanks and Indian thinkers and Indian politicians about Russia, China, and India, China, and India, Russia relations, and how the relationship in this triangle should be balanced. Because for the Russian diplomacy, I think this has been an issue for the 3 decades. So immediately after the Soviet Union collapsed, I think the Russian diplomacy started thinking about how to find the way to balance this relationship with two important partners in Asia. Say, Foreign Minister Primakov was the first one to come up with this idea of RIC, right? So Russia, India, China, triangular format platform for discussions. It hasn't been especially effective, specifically given the fact that BRICS and other institutions appeared, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization now hosts all the three nations together. But I think that it's been reiterated on numerous occasions by Russian diplomats that Russia would want to see this format work, would want this format to be the way to mitigate the possible challenges and possible difficulties. And also another thing that I think has been long on the agenda is to transmit to India that Russia-China relationship is in no sense and in no way targeted against Indian interests, be it in Eurasia or elsewhere. And this is probably why it is very important nowadays for all the three countries, first of all, to talk, but second of all, to think about this common Eurasian security architecture that President Putin spoke about a couple of weeks ago in his address to the Russian Foreign Ministry. And now it's very important that President Putin, President Modi discuss, Prime Minister Modi, discuss their vision of Eurasia and discuss how two nations can contribute to this space to be inclusive and mutually secure and mutually beneficial for all the nations in the region.
Now, of course, the two leaders would have discussed a whole gamut of bilateral issues during their talks, but it was inevitable that the Russia-Ukraine war was going to come up in these talks. Now, 2 years ago, on the sidelines of the SCO summit in Samarkand, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said to President Putin, this is not an era of war. And those words then echoed around the globe. This time around, the message from Prime Minister Modi to President Putin seems to be, and I'm reading this out, India has always called for respecting the UN Charter, including territorial integrity and sovereignty. There is no solution on the battlefield. Dialogue and diplomacy is the way forward. How do you think this has been received in Moscow?
Well, I think that it has been received pretty well because we can say once and twice and three times, both India, Russia, and China, that there is no solution on the battlefield. But what we hear from Brussels and what we hear from Washington is that the battlefield is exactly the place where the destiny of the continent will be decided. So for now, we don't see any similar attempt from the Western side to contribute to the diplomatic solution to the conflict and to contribute to the negotiations to start in the near future. And which is why I think Moscow highly values the constructive and pragmatic approach that India has taken towards the conflict, because on the one hand, there are these headlines, but on the other hand, we see India abstaining from any negative UN resolutions concerning the conflict. And we also see India being very, very pragmatic in terms of how it approaches the conflict, because there are two cases that we can recall and also recall from yesterday and from today, because there has just been decided that the Indian citizens who joined the forces in order to join the conflict and be part of the conflict will be sent home and will be fired from the military. And this is a very pragmatic step, similar to the one that Prime Minister Modi took at the early stages of the war, when he managed to save the Indian students, right, who were stuck in Ukraine, and they managed to escape home and to get back safe and sound to India. So this is the policy of small steps that we see from India, which is first of all targeted at implementing Indian national interests and making sure that Indian citizens are safe and are not part of the conflict. I think this is a very wise and pragmatic approach that Moscow and Kremlin in particular couldn't help but value and respect.
Well, yes, it's interesting that you bring this up because, Indians being sort of recruited into the Russian military and then being sent into, dangerous situations, that has really been an issue of considerable concern to New Delhi. Some said it had even caused some tensions between the two countries. But yes, that issue was taken up on priority by the Prime Minister of India, and it seems like the two sides have reached a resolution. Let me also ask you this, Julia. The timing of this visit is significant from another standpoint, though I'm pretty sure that this wasn't factored into the planning by New Delhi. But as we speak, while on the one hand, Prime Minister Modi and President Putin are holding talks in Moscow, NATO leaders are getting ready for their summit in Washington to mark 75 years of the military alliance. And needless to say, President Zelensky is also watching this visit very closely. He has issued a statement clearly expressing his displeasure. The United States, I think would be safe to say, is also watching this very, very closely. The State Department has even said that we have raised our concerns with India. How do you think NATO and the West in general are viewing Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia?
Well, on the one hand, I would say that I think it's a very wrong approach, since we are trying to promote the role of the global majority in the world, to assess everything from the Western perspective. But on the other hand, like be it the visit or any other initiatives that Russia, India, China, or any other country of the global majority is undertaking on the world arena. However, I totally understand that we are so used to this mentality, this mode of thinking, that we try to assess everything, view everything like with the Western eyes, and we try to assess how it is seen and perceived. But the mirror question can be asked: how is the NATO summit viewed in Asia or in Eurasia? Because NATO has been promoting this NATO Plus format for years now, like for 5 or 6 years, right? And for a couple of years, they have been also inviting the countries which are not part of the alliance and are not going to be the part of the alliance, but who are located in Asia, such as Japan or South Korea, and who NATO headquarters and NATO leadership wants to involve into closer cooperation in the Asia Pacific, which is a very detrimental step to the Asia Pacific security. And in this sense, of course, the summit can be seen as a counterbalancing act, as another attempt by the leaders to showcase that despite the initiatives that the West and NATO in particular nowadays is trying to undertake in Asia, because we know that Asia is a long time goal for NATO after the conflict in Europe stops one way or another. So the summit that we are now having in Moscow is an opportunity to show to the West that despite of those efforts, there is a separate dialogue and there is a separate effort being undertaken in Eurasia to oppose those attempts to underpin the rules-based world order, as they usually call it in Washington.
All right, Julia, as we wrap up this discussion, let's move away from geopolitics for a moment and talk about another important aspect of this bilateral relationship, the strong people-to-people connect that has always been there between the two countries, that has brought us closer. In fact, Prime Minister Modi made a reference to it while addressing the Indian diaspora in Moscow. He talked about how Indian films, Indian cinema, Indian music have been so popular over the years and decades in Russia. He made a special reference to, legendary filmmaker, Indian filmmaker Raj Kapoor, who was very, very popular in Russia back in the day. My question to you is, and many say that a mention of India does evoke a certain nostalgia even today in Russia. What do you think this visit by Prime Minister Modi means for the people-to-people ties between India and Russia?
Well, for people-to-people ties, any occasion as such, any big event as such, is an opportunity to become part of the sideline events, because like festivals and diaspora meetings and also other related activities, if they exist. And in case of India, I don't know who wants to hear that, but I need to say, and I can't avoid saying that, is that the Indian embassy in Moscow is very, very active in terms of promoting Indian culture. And I've visited several events, well, as part of my work, but I've seen many people who have nothing to do with international relations or political analysis joining the events, enjoying the theater stages, enjoying the music festivals, enjoying the food festivals, because I think that everyone is very much of a fan of the Indian cuisine in this country. Well, maybe not everyone, but there are many people. And I think that the embassy is doing great work, and they will also try to collect their efforts around the Prime Minister's visit in order to further promote the Indian culture in Russia. And I think that this is a very important job to sustain these ties, to sustain this image, this benign image of India. And I think that this should be going on. And I don't see any reason to think that the relationship between people will become worse, or that the perception will become worse, because a lot of work is being underway in order to sustain the high level of mutual trust or mutual sympathy, so to speak, from the Russian people towards Indian people.
All right, very interesting to get that perspective from Moscow. Julia Melnikova, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me on News 9 today.
Thank you for having me. Bye.